Welcome back, everyone. This is Dan Krebs here talking about my book, Defining the Call. And today we're going to be talking about Chapter 7 of my book, The Calling of David. And in doing so, we're going to talk about his lineage, his background, where David came from. Now, David was not the first king of Israel, but he was definitely the most godly king of Israel. In fact, his nickname became the man after God's own heart. We read that not only in the Old Testament, but the New Testament as well. He was a man that God loved and God used to help refine the nation of Israel. We'll discover he wasn't perfect, but he was definitely a godly king. His lineage is an interesting one. David comes from a shepherding background. His father's name was Jesse, and David was the youngest of 8 sons. And even his own father, Jesse, didn't see much value in David. In fact, when Samuel came to town looking for the king, because God told him that the king will be found in Bethlehem, he went to Jesse's house and he looked at all of his sons, and none of the sons fit the bill for king. And so he asked Jesse, "Do you have other sons?" And Jesse said, "Yeah, I have a son. He's David. He's out in the field. He's not too impressive, this young redhead kid." But Samuel called him in, and he knew as soon as he saw him that young David was going to be king. David had an interesting lineage. It wasn't only shepherds that were in his family, but he did have some amazing people. We know the Bible tells us that his grandfather his name was Ohad, and Ohad was the son of Boaz and Ruth. Now Ruth, of course, was a Moabite. She was a widow, and God called her to go back with her mother-in-law Naomi into the land of Israel to be part of the people of Israel. She was grafted in, and she became part of the lineage of David, which of course became part of the lineage of Jesus. A wonderful history there. You know, when you find out there were some incredible experiences in ordinary families. Even though Jesse was just a shepherd, his family was shepherd, they were wealthy people, but they were shepherds. They still had some amazing heritage in their family history. David had that. And he had that sense of destiny in his life when it came to where God was taking him. So when it comes to David, the first thing I want to talk about regarding his character is that David was humble. Humility is one of the attributes that has to be in the person's life who is called by God. Now, I mentioned earlier that Moses, the Bible says that Moses was the most humble man who walked the face of the earth outside of Jesus. I want to focus on humility when it came to David, because we really see it in his character. When you read about the story of David when Samuel came to town looking for who was going to become king, David was in the fields. He was taking care of the sheep. Now, there's no doubt that David knew that Samuel was coming to town, and he could have thought, hey, this is my opportunity to get out of this one-horse town and to do something amazing with my life. He just did his job, did what he was supposed to do, and that was being the shepherd for his father's sheep. But when Samuel saw David, he saw something in him that he did not see in the present king of King Saul. Some would think that Saul was a humble king, and when you start off looking at his life, when he began to become king, was called to be king, Saul seemed humble, but he really wasn't. In fact, it's an interesting story that when he was anointed as king and the prophet was going to announce him as king, the Bible says that Saul was found hiding amongst the baggage. He did not want to be seen as king. He felt he wasn't qualified. He was so insecure, and the opinions of other people was so important that it affected him the rest of his life. He was always wondering what people thought of him. He was always wondering how he looked by those who followed him. And because of that, he made some decisions just to please people rather than please God. David wasn't like that. He was humble. He felt unqualified in many ways, but yet he knew where his strength came from. You see, when he was in those fields working for his father, taking care of the sheep, he wasn't just sitting there watching sheep. He was preparing himself for his future leadership. Yes, he was taking care of sheep, but as the sheep were being taken care of, David had to kill a lion. He had to kill a bear. How did he do that? With his sling. The very same sling that he would slew Goliath years later. So what he learned in the field, he was able to use to exalt himself as king. When he became the hero in the story of David and Goliath, we see his true character coming out. Because look what it says here in 1 Samuel chapter 17. You come against me, he said to Goliath, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. He didn't come to Goliath and say, I'm coming against you because of stuff that I learned when I was a kid. I am tough, I am rough, and I'm going to wipe you out. He didn't talk that way. He realized that all of his strength, all of his ability came from God himself, and he was able to stand before Goliath in confidence, not because he was such a great person in himself, but because he served such a great God. A humble person of the Lord is not a person that says, "Oh, I can't do it. I'm scared what people think of me," and "Oh, I'm really shy." That's not a humble person. That is an insecure person. A humble person like David is one saying, "I can't do it in myself, but I can do all things through Christ." God is the one that can sustain me. God is the one that can help me. That is why David said, "I come against you, Goliath, by the God of Israel. I come against you, Goliath, in his name, not my own name." And so humility is all part of it. Humility is what made him who he was. Now we realize, and we're going to talk about this as time went on, that terrible thing called pride began to enter into David's life, and he began to slip, and he began to make mistakes that affected him for the rest of his life. But the reason why God called him, and the reason why God is calling you into whatever ministry you might be going into, the reason why God is calling you, because he sees humility in you. He sees something in you that he wants to use, because he knows that you're not going to rely upon your own strength. I know when I was in Bible school, I took a course on how to preach. And I remember listening to some of the students that were preaching. They'd stand in front of the class, and we'd have to grade their preaching. And not exactly a very anointed class, but there we are grading their preaching. And some of them were eloquent. Some of them were amazing speakers. And the amazing thing is that none of those guys and girls that did that in class ended up in ministry. That was a very unique situation. It's just interesting to see that sometimes we look on the outside. Now, as a child, as a young man, I was thinking in class, "Oh, wow, those guys can speak so well, and man, I wish I could speak like them." But God doesn't see the outside. He sees the inside. And I want you to know today, if God is calling you, he's looking for that very key characteristic called humility. He knew where his strength came from. He knew it came from the Lord. King Saul thought his strength came from himself. So when he heard those words that King Saul killed his thousands, but David killed his tens of thousands, he was concerned because he thought that people were turning against him. He was more concerned what people thought of him than what God thought of him. When you are in a leadership position and your biggest concern is, am I popular? Do people like me? You are going to make your decisions based on that opinion. But if your focus is on serving the Lord and what God thinks of you, is God happy with what you're doing? The decisions that you're making, are they decisions that God told you to make? That's what matters. Surrounding yourself with godly people, people of prayer, people of integrity, and seeking their advice, saying, what does God want in this situation? And as you do that, as you surround yourself with godly people, and as you seek the Lord in prayer and in the Word, God will lead you in humility, and you'll be able to take down some incredible giants in your life, in your ministry. So may I encourage you today with that word as we begin our talk on David. And next time we're going to continue our talk on David as well. Look at other attributes of David's character that made him the man of God that he was. God bless you. We'll talk to you soon.